Welcome to the Sleep to Dream Analytics Explainer video, where better sleep starts with better understanding. Have you ever wondered why you're a complete night owl, but maybe your partner is up at the crack of dawn? Or how some people just seem to crush it on 6 hours of sleep while you need a solid 8 just to feel human? Well, it turns out the answer isn't just about your habits or your willpower. Nope, a huge part of it is actually written in your DNA. So today, let's get into the incredible science of how our genes literally program our sleep. So yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? We tend to think of sleep as something we control, a matter of discipline. But a massive amount of research now shows that it's a deeply fundamentally biological process. Let's take a look at the evidence and see how scientists first started to crack this amazing code. The whole story of sleep genetics really kicks off with the discovery of the body's internal master clock. And I'm not talking about a metaphor here. This is a real, physical mechanism inside our cells that keeps time. It's what tells our bodies when to be awake and when it's time to power down. What's so cool is how scientists first found the gears of this clock. It wasn't in people, but in the humble fruit fly. Way back in the 70s, researchers took on this absolutely mammoth task, screening thousands and thousands of fruit flies, just looking for the weird ones, the mutants with really strange sleep schedules. And it was by studying these little flies with broken clocks that they finally zeroed in on the very first gene that runs our internal timing. And that one groundbreaking discovery, it led us to this huge foundational concept, circadian clock chains. You can think of these as the master timekeepers of the body. And they don't just control sleep, they run almost all of our 24-hour rhythms, from when we get hungry to when our hormones are released. But yeah, their most obvious job is managing that daily sleep-wake cycle. So how does this little molecular clock actually tick? Well, it's this incredibly elegant feedback loop that runs on a roughly 24-hour schedule. It goes like this. First, the clock genes turn on and start making proteins. Then, those proteins start to build up inside the cell. Once they hit a certain level, boom, they act like a brake, turning off the very genes that made them in the first place. Then, as those proteins naturally break down, the brake comes off, the genes switch back on, and the whole cycle starts all over again. It's just this beautiful, self-regulating system. And here is the part that is just mind-blowing. This core clock mechanism, this feedback loop they first found in fruit flies, they later discovered it was almost identical in mice and, you guessed it, in us. Scientists call this evolutionary conservation. All that means is that this system is so critical for life, it's been preserved across hundreds of millions of years of evolution. It just works. But finding that master clock, that was just Act 1. For a long time, the hunt was on for these individual, specific sleep genes. But science has had this huge shift in thinking, moving away from single genes to the much, much bigger and more complex world of genomics. This really gets to the heart of that change. See, traditional genetics often looks for one single gene that causes one single trait. But genomics, it's a system-wide approach. It's the recognition that complex behaviors like sleep aren't run by one single gene, but by this vast, interconnected network of genes all talking to each other. And this shift in thinking was absolutely necessary because as scientists dug deeper, they realized, yes, sleep is anything but simple. It's not just one thing. I mean, think about it. It's about how long you sleep, when you get sleepy, how deep your sleep is, and even how you bounce back from a rough night. Every single one of those is a different piece of the puzzle. Researchers have a term for this. They call sleep a rich phenotype. It's just a scientific way of saying it's incredibly complex, with all these different measurable parts. And what we know now is that the genetic landscape for sleep involves hundreds, maybe even thousands of genes, all interacting in these super intricate networks. Okay, so if it's that complicated, how in the world do scientists even begin to figure it all out? Well, they're using a really powerful set of modern tools to try and decode our collective sleep code. Right, they have this amazing genetic toolkit now. They still start small with model organisms like flies and mice to find those first important clues, but then they scale up big time. They use methods like Genome-wide association studies, or GWAS. Think of it like a giant search party. They scan the entire DNA of thousands and thousands of people, looking for tiny variations that pop up again and again in, say, early birds compared to night owls. It lets them map the genetic hotspots that are linked to our specific sleep patterns. And while these super high-tech genomic tools are pretty new, the basic idea that sleep is genetic, that's actually been around for a while. Decades ago, studies on identical twins showed that they have way more similar sleep patterns than fraternal twins. And research on inbred mice, which are basically genetically identical, also pointed to a strong genetic foundation for sleep. So all that earlier work really laid the groundwork for what's happening today. So this all leads to the big question, right? So what? Why does mapping out all the genetics of sleep actually matter for our health and for our future? Well, at its very core, the goal is just fundamental understanding. As this quote from the research puts it, it's all about uncovering the basic molecular events that make us tick. By understanding the blueprint, we can finally understand how the machine really works. And that kind of understanding has huge, real-world implications. It helps scientists find brand new targets for medications to treat sleep disorders. It could lead to personalized treatments for people with conditions that are rooted in their genes. And crucially, it helps us finally understand the deep connections between poor sleep, stress, and major diseases, from depression all the way to heart disease. So, if there's one thing you should take away from all this, it's this. Your need for sleep and the time you naturally feel sleepy, it's not a personal failing. It's not a lack of discipline. It is a fundamental part of your biology, programmed by a genetic system that's been fine-tuned over millions of years of evolution. And that leaves us with one last really big question to think about. As our ability to read this genetic code gets better and better, we're getting closer to a future where we might actually be able to edit it. So, if we can read our sleep code, should we try to rewrite it? Definitely something to sleep on. Thank you for watching the Sleep to Dream Analytics Explainer video. We hope you sleep well and dream easy.